So, an era is coming to an end. An era which truly showcased Britain as a bastion of impartiality when it comes to journalism. I am, of course, talking about Kirsty Wark's departure from Newsnight last week. Oh yes, a nation mourned, or so you might have thought from the wailing and rending of garments that could be detected right through the British media and political class. Kirsty Wark bids farewell to Newsnight after 30 years on show. Former colleagues and interviewees of presenter invited onto programme to commemorate her news career. Tributes pour in for Kirsty Wark after she presents BBC Newsnight for the last time. Victoria Derbyshire leads tributes as Kirsty Wark quits Newsnight after 30 years. And of course, let's not forget the BBC itself. Tributes as broadcasting titan Wark leaves Newsnight. Former political leaders came together to pay tribute to broadcasting titan Kirsty Wark as she presented Newsnight for the last time on Friday. But the BBC really outdid itself with a 10-minute clip posted on their YouTube channel that had been cut from the Friday edition of Newsnight. That would be the last edition that Kirsty presented, which just was enough to make you want to throw up, I suppose. Yes, this time she was the Queen of Newsnight, just to vary it slightly from the Titan, I suppose.
Kirsty, you've been a legend in British journalism for more than 3 decades. Tough but fair and always exceptionally smart. I wish you the very best of luck, and I'm sure you'll carry on doing great things.
Imagine accepting a tribute from an unindicted war criminal whose hands are drenched in the blood of British personnel and innocent Iraqi men, women and children. Just how vile is that? Overwhelmed by the glowing tributes from the politicians that she was meant to be holding to account for the last 30 years, it all proved too much for poor Kirsty, as the Daily Mail informed us. Kirsty Wark is moved to tears after she bows out of Newsnight. Kirsty Wark breaks down in tears as she brings down the curtain on 30 years in Newsnight, as Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and David Cameron lead tributes to broadcasting titan. Let's leave aside for the moment that our political media elite, trapped in their own little bubble, seem totally unaware that Kirsty Wark leaving Newsnight is of absolute minimal interest to the vast bulk of the population. Let's look at what is really going on here.
Kirsty, many congratulations on over 3 decades presenting Newsnight. You have questioned us, quizzed us, held us to account, and often terrified us. But a great record. Many congratulations.
Dodgy Dave there, telling us how Kirsty Wark held politicians to him to account. Well, she probably did on some issues, but let's look at what's really going on here. All these accolades have got nothing to do with what a brilliant interviewer she is. There's something else going on here. And what is really going on here is that Kirsty Wark gave the British establishment exactly what they want. It's what the British establishment want from really any prominent journalist working in the UK, but particularly those working for a state broadcaster. And that role is to make sure that any type of challenge that's coming from the left is stamped down on and stamped down hard. Anybody who breaks with the status quo or is presenting a realistic challenge to the status quo, it's the job of people like Kirsty Wark to make sure it's put back in the bottle prompto. It's broadcasting as propaganda, and indeed, to give Kirsty Wark her due, Kirsty Wark was in a class of her own when it came to doing exactly that. When it came to the challenge presented by Jeremy Corbyn in 2015, there was little doubt that Kirsty Wark was going to do her part to defend the establishment and defend the status quo from this upstart challenger. But let's start at the very beginning. The clip we're going to see comes from Newsnight, broadcast on July 21st, 2015. Now, that was the same night that the first poll came out that showed Jeremy Corbyn in the lead and that he had a realistic chance of winning the Labour leadership. Kirsty's guests that night on her show were John McTernan, former advisor to Tony Blair, and Allegra Stratton, who was at that time working on the Newsnight programme, but who, of course, later went on to work for Boris Johnson. Now, there you go. A political advisor to Tony Blair and somebody who went on to be a political advisor to Boris Johnson. Well, my goodness, what a balanced panel that obviously was to discuss the news that Jeremy Corbyn was indeed in the lead in the leadership contest being held in 2015. And since we're mentioning Allegra Stratton, it might just be worthwhile reminding ourselves how her political career ended.
Can you stop, please? Can you stop? I'm going to make a statement. You don't. The British people have made immense sacrifices in the ongoing battle against COVID-19. I now fear that my comments in the leaked video of the 20th of December last year have become a distraction in that fight. My remarks seemed to make light of the rules that people were doing everything to obey. That was never my intention. I will regret those remarks for the rest of my days, and I offer my profound apologies to all of you at home for them. Working in government is an immense privilege. I tried to do right by you all, to behave with civility and decency, and act to the high standards you expect of Number 10, rightly expect of Number 10. I will always be proud of what was achieved at COP26 in Glasgow. This country and the Prime Minister's leadership on climate change and on nature will make a lasting difference to the whole world. It has been an honour to play a part in that. I understand the anger and frustration that people feel. To all of you who lost loved ones, who endured intolerable loneliness, and who struggled with your businesses, I am truly sorry. And this afternoon, I am offering my resignation to the Prime Minister. Thanks for your time.
The clip that we're going to watch was posted on the BBC Newsnight YouTube channel using the heading, Labour MPs Morons to consider Jeremy Corbyn for leader. Newsnight. No bias there, obviously. Now, as the Canary points out, the segment is a reminder of the contempt held in startling circles for left-wing views and those who share them. Corbynism is the 21st century version of democratic socialism, the ideology that brought us the NHS, universal education, workers' right and the welfare state. It is a school of political thought that made a vast contribution to Britain and the world, yet BBC Newsnight treats him like a candidate from the monster raving Looney Party. In no way can Kirsty Wark be described as a journalist in this clip. Her own personal views, her own personal prejudices are perfectly clear, perfectly obvious to the audience, with absolutely no attempt to disguise where it is she stands on the issue of Jeremy Corbyn possibly becoming leader of the Labour Party.
We got news of an astonishing poll of the Labour leadership election. Allegra has just arrived, and right now she has some of the details. I mean, tell me.
Right, so it looks like, on first prep, we knew that Jeremy Corbyn was doing quite well.
Yep.
It looks like from the Times' poll today with YouGov that Jeremy Corbyn on first preference is...
One poll.
So he's ahead. Our number crunchers in the Newsnight office that me and you take very seriously,
Yep.
he's ahead by a ginormous amount that even they take seriously. This latter figure, the actual eventual result, is scary for the Labour Party, for some of the Labour people I've spoken to this evening, and no doubt John McDonnell will say this, because no one thought at the end of the day Jeremy Corbyn would come first. The number the Times newspaper has this morning, or this evening and tomorrow morning, has him ahead. Now, Labour people I've spoken to this evening say this is a necessary part of the process. Labour people need to focus. They need to look at these numbers and think, do we want him to lead our party? And they think over the fullness of time, remember this person's not elected till September. Labour activists will go, oh, actually, I'm not sure I do actually want him.
So this is a kind of, YouGov doing a service to sleepy Labour voters to wake up and smell the coffee.
Or is it? There may be many people who want a left-wing leader.
Exactly. What does this say? This one single poll say?
The first thing it says is the moronic MPs who nominated Jeremy Corbyn to have a debate
Includes John Cruddas,
need
though.
their heads felt. They need their heads felt. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Do you accept there are Labour members and indeed people in the country that do support Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, it's not a chimera.
Political parties are full of suicidally inclined activists, and clearly some of our members are suicidally inclined. These figures are disastrous for the Labour Party. There's no other way of describing it. Disastrous.
John says, and in fact, you see, of course, this is not a long way off, it's to September, but as John said, we've got intervening holidays where people don't actually have their eye on the ball. And who is going to grasp this?
Once Jeremy Corbyn had actually won the leadership contest, her attitude became less one of derision and more honed in terms of attack. Now, here she is in another issue of Newsnight, where she's promulgating the lie, a deliberate lie, a lie that the right wing of the Labour Party were then and still are keen to promote, along with the rest of the British establishment, that the Labour Party manifesto of 2017 was in some way uncosted. Now, Barry Gardner was one of the guests on the show, but just watch how she laughs when Barry Gardner calls out her deliberate, blatant lie.
Now from the Shadow Cabinet is Barry Gardner. Good evening, thanks very much for coming in.
Kirsty, did you honestly say uncosted? Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
Is that an old money?
That's exactly where the costings are. And actually, if you look at the policy that was announced this morning, and that you were talking about the childcare announcement, the money's in there. In fact, it's actually, we think now that it'll actually cost less than we costed at it originally.
Well, let's go back, first of all, and look at Brexit. And you saw there Len McCluskey and Dave Prentice.
Dear, I don't know. And you called me the Shadow Secretary for International Development.
Well, at least you can whistle.
International Trade.
At least you can whistle.
Then we have Wark's attempt to draw a deliberate comparison between Jeremy Corbyn, a lifelong anti-racist campaigner, and the racist thug Donald Trump. Now, I know Donald Trump recently survived an assassination attempt, which is appalling that somebody tried to assassinate him, but at the same time, he was a racist thug before he was shot, and I've got every reason to believe he'll still be a racist thug after he recovers from being shot. So to be clear, Jeremy Corbyn has never worn a hat like this. The hat was photoshopped onto his head by the Newsnight team. At no point on that programme did Kirsty Wark make it clear that it was a photoshopped image behind her. The audience were left with the clear impression that this was an actual photograph of Jeremy Corbyn aping Donald Trump. And when you look at something like that, you see the belatedness of it. I mean, it's not journalism. I mean, there's no way this can be called journalism. It is just propaganda, and there is no other word for it. It's also worth pointing out that there's no other example in the Newsnight archive of any other major political figure, Theresa May, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer. There's no other example of a major political figure having their personal image in terms of what they're wearing or in terms of how they look photoshopped and then used as a backdrop for the Newsnight programme. The only person that's ever been done to was Jeremy Corbyn. And the reason's clear, because people like Theresa May, etc., they are treated with a certain amount of respect in what is a serious political programme, allegedly, Newsnight, whereas figures from the left are just doesn't matter, apparently. I mean, they can just do anything they want if the figure's coming from the left. And the propaganda intention behind the image manipulation was just so obvious, just so crass. And of course, Kirsty Wark wouldn't have been doing her job if she wasn't active in promoting the great anti-Semitism smear that blighted so much of Jeremy Corbyn's time as Labour Party leader. Kirsty Wark's treatment of Jenny Manson, a founding member of Jewish Voice for Labour, a left-wing anti-Zionist organisation who actually supported Jeremy Corbyn during this period, was so appalling that it led to a flood of complaints to the BBC. JVL has been inundated with messages from both members and non-members outraged at Kirsty Wark's hostile treatment of Jenny Manson on Newsnight on the 17th of November. Many messages told us they were going to complain to the BBC. Jenny was on the show with arch-Zionist Louise Ellman. Now, the difference between Wark's approach to Jenny in terms of questioning and tone of voice and the way she conducted the interview as opposed to the deferential approach that she took with Louise Ellman was just so stark, it was just so obvious. No viewer could have missed the difference in the tone and in the way that Kirsty Wark treated Jenny Manson on the one hand and Louise Ellman on the other hand. Interestingly, like the Barry Gardner clip we looked at earlier, Jenny had to begin the interview by challenging Kirsty Wark on a blatant lie that she told earlier on in the programme. Kirsty Wark had clearly stated that Jeremy Corbyn had rejected the findings of the ECHR report into anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Now, that was a lie that the Labour right were keen to promote at the time and the rest of the British establishment were keen to promote at the time. Now, that just is not true, as Jenny correctly says to Kirsty Wark. He did not reject the ECHR report. He certainly qualifications, he certainly made the point about he thought that the anti-Semitism had been over-exaggerated for political purposes, but he, without qualification, accepted all the recommendations. Now, there's a lot of difference between having a criticism of the report, which he did have, and saying that he rejected it. He did not reject it, he accepted every single one of that report's recommendations. So, let's have a look at Jenny pulling her up and calling her out with a lie.
To discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Jenny Manson, the co-chair of Jewish Force for Labour, and from Liverpool Riverside, the former MP for that area, Louise Ellman. Jenny Manson, first of all, why couldn't Jeremy Corbyn simply apologise today for what he said on the day that the report was published?
Well, first of all, I want to correct something you were saying. He did not reject the findings of the HRC. I want to say some things about the HRC report myself. He did not reject the findings. In that speech, you'll find he did not reject it.
He said that, let's be quite clear, what he said, and he said it there, that it actually had been, accusations of anti-Semitism in the party had been dramatically exaggerated.
So I was talking about the fact he did not reject the findings of the HRC report, which I think was said a moment ago.
So yes, this lying establishment stooge has been festooned with praise from all sides on the political media elite that she obviously belongs to. And no doubt for her hard work in making sure that the left is never given a fair hearing in this country. She'll one day be rewarded for that. No doubt a seat in the House of Lords is not that far off for her. But despite the media, despite the press coverage of this momentous event of Kirsty Wark leaving Newsnight, it's important to point out there are many people in this country who will not be shedding a single tear at the departure of Kirsty Wark. In fact, the only thing we've got to say to Kirsty Wark is goodbye and good riddance. Please support Left Wing Voices on social media by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.